7 people, including former NASCAR driver Greg Biffle, his wife, and his 2 children, were tragically killed when the aircraft they were flying in crashed at the Statesville Regional Airport in North Carolina earlier today. Now, normally I don't make videos about breaking news plane crashes because there's so much that we don't know and it's too easy to speculate, but this one hits really close to home, and that's why I felt it was important to make this quick update just to walk you through the facts and talk about what we know so far. I'm Hoover, and welcome to your Pilot Debrief. I want to start with a quick overview from the Aviation Safety Network. The aircraft involved was a Cessna 550 Citation II business jet. This is what that aircraft looked like, just for reference. And as of this time, the Aviation Safety Network is saying there were 6 fatalities, but the news is currently reporting 7 fatalities. According to the preliminary information, the jet was trying to return to runway 28 following an issue on departure. It's not known what that issue was, but we will take a look at the flight data here in a second. The aircraft collided with the terrain short of the runway, crossed a road and the airport perimeter fence before finally coming to rest on the runway, and a post-crash fire ensued. The aircraft's speed was fluctuating. Before we take a look at the flight data, one of the first things that we need to do is talk about the weather at the Statesville Regional Airport earlier today. This is showing you the weather history for today, and it was VFR early in the morning, improving to about 5,000 foot ceilings with 10 miles visibility. That was around 9:35 to 9:55 local time. Now, initial reports were saying that the crash happened at 10:32 local time, but according to the flight data, it looks like the crash possibly occurred at 10:15 local time. However, the important takeaway from this weather is showing you how at 9:55 we had VFR conditions, then at 10:15 it was marginal VFR with 5 miles visibility and 1,200 foot ceilings. And then at 10:35 it was 1 3/4 mile visibility with 1,000 foot ceilings. You also had some rain in here with scattered clouds at 400 feet.
7 people, including former NASCAR driver Greg Biffle, his wife, and his 2 children, were tragically killed when the aircraft they were flying in crashed at the Statesville Regional Airport in North Carolina earlier today. Normally, I avoid covering breaking news aviation accidents because so much information is unknown early on and speculation can easily lead to misinformation, but this incident hits extremely close to home. That is why I felt it was important to provide a factual update and walk through what we know so far. I'm Hoover, and welcome to your Pilot Debrief. According to the Aviation Safety Network, the aircraft involved was a Cessna 550 Citation II business jet. At this time, Aviation Safety Network reports 6 fatalities, while multiple news outlets are reporting 7, showing how early information can still be evolving. Preliminary reports indicate the aircraft attempted to return to runway 28 shortly after departure due to an unknown issue, impacted terrain short of the runway, crossed a road and the airport perimeter fence, and came to rest near the runway, followed by a post-crash fire.
So over the course of about 30 minutes, you had some rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, which would have been taking place right around the time they were taking off and leading up to the crash. The reason why this is important is because we need to understand what type of flight plan they were on when they took off. Now, it's possible they took off on a VFR flight plan based on the weather conditions, but because they were rapidly deteriorating, my guess is that they at least looked at the forecast and they saw that, and hopefully they were filed on an IFR flight plan, which means after they got airborne, they would have been talking to air traffic control. Now, this does bring up a minor point. When we look at the actual airfield itself, the Statesville Regional Airport, it is a non-towered airfield, so they could have gotten that IFR clearance while they were on the ground prior to taking off, but we just don't know that for sure. There's a lot we still don't know about this investigation. I haven't heard any air traffic control audio yet, so again, I don't want to speculate about what took place when they actually took off. What I do want to talk about is the flight data, because that's a hard set of facts that we can reference without necessarily speculating as to the cause of this terrible tragedy. This is the information that I imported into Flysto from ADSB Exchange, which gives you the ADSB data from the aircraft itself. We can see they departed from runway 10 at 15:07 Zulu, which would be 10:07 local time, and they immediately make this left-hand turn on departure. And right off the bat, things seem to be going pretty standard, a normal departure with a left-hand turnout here. Now, what's interesting to me though is they get up here to 2,200 feet MSL, which is about 1,200 feet, 1,267 feet above the ground. Then immediately after that, they start a descent. And if we let this go all the way through, you can see they get all the way down here as low as 600 feet above the ground. So for some reason on this departure here, when they're making this left-hand turn, they're up at, again, 1,250 feet above the ground, and then they make a descent to just 600 feet above the ground. Now, we don't know why that happened. We don't know if they have a problem with the aircraft and they're troubleshooting. We don't know if it's an emergency situation, or possibly they took off VFR and they descended to stay out of the weather until they were able to pick up an IFR flight plan.
Before examining the flight data, it is critical to understand the weather conditions at Statesville Regional Airport earlier today. Weather history shows that conditions were VFR early in the morning, improving to around 5,000-foot ceilings with 10 miles of visibility between 9:35 and 9:55 local time. Initial reports suggested the crash occurred around 10:32 local time, but flight data indicates it may have happened closer to 10:15. The key takeaway is how rapidly the weather deteriorated. At 9:55, conditions were still VFR. By 10:15, visibility dropped to 5 miles with ceilings around 1,200 feet, considered marginal VFR. By 10:35, visibility had decreased further to 1 3/4 miles with 1,000-foot ceilings, rain, and scattered clouds as low as 400 feet, all occurring around the time of departure and leading up to the crash.
So we just don't know, and I don't want to speculate as to the reason for that. Now, the next thing that's important to look at is right around this point, they started to begin their climb again. And I'm just going to let this play in real time so we can see. This is the vertical speed showing you the rate of climb. So they're at about 1,000 feet per minute right now until they get to about this point right here. And then all of a sudden they start descending again. So now you're seeing this fluctuation going as low as negative 832 feet per minute. So there's potentially some aircraft control issue here or something going on where they're starting to climb, but then they're descending again. And they go from negative 881 feet per minute at the bottom there up to a climb rate of 4,500 feet per minute, and then all the way as high as 6,600 feet per minute. At this point, if we look at the heads-up view from the actual cockpit itself, you can see that they're 2,800 feet above the ground. It appears to be a very aggressive climb here at 6,600 feet per minute. They're doing 157 knots, but keep in mind that this is ground speed. It's not the actual indicated airspeed. Right here is the highest point they're going to reach during the flight, which is 4,500 feet MSL, or about 3,600 feet above the ground. And what you're going to see here as they begin this left-hand turn, they're starting a descent, but look at this vertical rate of speed here. They're doing a very aggressive descent. As they're finishing this turn here and pointing back the other direction, their vertical speed is almost 5,000 foot per minute rate of descent in that turn, which is extremely aggressive and not something that you want to be doing, especially if you're in the weather. And even if you're VFR, it's still a pretty aggressive maneuver to be making. But what's interesting also is we go from, again, that negative 5,000 foot per minute rate of descent. A few seconds later, we're back up to a almost a 4,000 foot rate a minute climbing the aircraft back up. So I don't know if there's some aircraft control issues going on here or what's happening, but it's obviously not a very stable platform as this aircraft is making this maneuver and starting to point back towards the airfield.
These rapidly changing weather conditions raise questions about the type of flight plan the crew was operating under. It is possible they departed under VFR, but given the forecast, they may have filed IFR. Statesville Regional Airport is a non-towered airport, meaning IFR clearance could have been obtained on the ground prior to departure, but we do not know that for sure. There is no confirmed air traffic control audio available at this time, so speculation would be inappropriate. What we can examine is the flight data itself. NTSB data shows the aircraft departed runway 10 at 15:07 Zulu, or approximately 10:07 local time, and immediately made a standard left-hand turn. Initially, the departure appears normal as the aircraft climbed to about 2,200 feet mean sea level, roughly 1,250 feet above ground level, before unexpectedly beginning a descent.
And my gut tells me at this point, they've made the decision that, hey, we need to get back to the airport. We need to get this thing on the ground and resolve whatever issue that we're dealing with at this point. They end up going back up to 3,100 feet MSL, so about 2,000 feet above the ground. Then they start descending again. And then let's go ahead and look at the altitude here and zoom this out. And what I want you to see is what it looks like they're doing here is essentially setting up for a downwind to land on runway 28, which is opposite the direction they took off from. Now, because there weren't any winds, this isn't necessarily going to be an issue, but you can see when they're on this downwind here, they're pretty close to the runway, so it is setting up for a tight pattern. When we look at the altitude, we can see when they're on this downwind here, right here at this point, just before they start that turn, they're at 850 feet above the ground and possibly below the weather. We don't know for sure. Diving down to about 400 feet above the ground here, which is a pretty low altitude to be at when you're on a downwind leg. Again, we don't know why they're that low on the downwind, possibly because of weather. We just don't know for sure. Now, what I've done is I've backed this up to show you the cockpit point of view as they're coming into the runway. So you can see the runway coming into view right here. They're making this right-hand turn to potentially set themselves up on a downwind to land on runway 28 opposite the direction they took off from, which isn't necessarily going to be an issue because the winds were pretty light. But look at this rate of descent here, 1,400 feet per minute. They're 600 feet above the ground now on the downwind, now at 500 feet. And they end up going as low as I think about 400 feet here. We're going to see that in a second. There we are, 400 feet AGL. Right there, that little turn to the right, to me, indicates possibly they're trying to fix their spacing because they realize they're a little bit tight to the runway. They're doing 172 knots, which I've never flown this aircraft before, but that seems pretty fast to me to be on the downwind, especially at 350 feet AGL. That's low, you're going fast, you're tight on the runway. Now watch what happens. They start to turn away and then the airspeed starts slowing down. And again, this is ground speed, so it's not an actual indicated airspeed. But pay attention to this altitude here. The rate of climb and descent stabilizes, so they're about 450 feet. I don't know what kind of weather they're seeing. They're at 160 knots. And then they're going to start this left-hand turn to point back towards the runway. All right, here they go making that left-hand turn, and pay attention to the airspeed as they start to continue this left-hand turn back around to get pointed at the runway. They're starting a shallow descent. Now they're up around 500 feet above the ground. The airspeed is starting to decay, so it's starting to get back more into the normal range that I would expect for flying on an approach here. We're going to start to see the runway come into view in just a second or two here. And it looks like everything is going okay. They're still potentially a little bit low here, 500 feet. And I'll pause right there. Okay, we're at 100 knots, 450 feet above the ground, and you can see the runway off in the distance. Continue. And there are some airspeed fluctuations here, so this could be, some inconsistent data from the ADSB. We're not sure at this point. And then the flight data is going to end right around here, I believe.
After reaching that altitude, the aircraft descended to approximately 600 feet above the ground before beginning another climb at around 1,000 feet per minute. Shortly afterward, the aircraft entered another descent, with vertical speed data showing extreme fluctuations. Descent rates exceeded 800 feet per minute, followed by aggressive climbs reaching more than 4,500 feet per minute and peaking near 6,600 feet per minute. These rapid changes indicate the aircraft was not maintaining a stable flight profile. The aircraft reached a maximum altitude of around 4,500 feet mean sea level before beginning a steep descent of nearly 5,000 feet per minute while turning back toward the airport, followed moments later by another aggressive climb, suggesting the crew was dealing with a serious situation and attempting to return to the airport.
Now again, I don't want to speculate as to the reason why they crashed. What I did want to point out is some of the flight data to show you some of the inconsistencies with that vertical speed, how they were doing these climbs and descents, how some of the maneuvering was potentially very aggressive. But we don't know what was going on with the aircraft. If it was a controllability issue, if there was something else happening, we just don't know. And that's why it's so important to wait for the NTSB to conduct their investigation to give us the actual data. That way we can go back and do a full debrief on it and figure out what actually went wrong. The one thing that we know for sure is that this was an absolutely heartbreaking tragedy to lose 7 people, including an entire family, so close to the Christmas holiday. And I know this isn't going to answer all the questions, but I hope it provided some clarity. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your support.
As the aircraft set up for landing on runway 28, it appeared to be flying a very tight traffic pattern. The aircraft descended to altitudes as low as 400 to 500 feet above ground level while still on the downwind leg, which is unusually low. Ground speed readings showed speeds up to 170 knots, which is fast for that phase of flight, especially at such a low altitude. As the aircraft turned toward the runway, speed began to decrease and descent rates briefly stabilized, and the runway became visible in the data before the flight information abruptly ended. At this stage, it is critical not to speculate about the cause. The NTSB investigation will provide definitive answers. What we do know is that this was a devastating tragedy that claimed 7 lives, including an entire family, just days before the Christmas holiday.